What happens when the most powerful man in America tries to humiliate one of the fastest rising powers in the world? Well, he gets an answer he never expected, not from politicians desperate to please, but from voices that shook the entire global stage. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reminder to the world that India bows to no one. When you look at this so-called attempt to corner India, it becomes almost laughable when you dissect it properly. The strategy was textbook, loud proclamations, pressure tactics, the kind of theatrics designed to force a nation into submission. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That old playbook doesn't work anymore. India today isn't some timid player desperate for validation from the West. It's a country with 1 billion voices, an economy charging ahead, and a foreign minister who wields words like scalpels. The effort to embarrass or corner was met not with hesitation, not with apology, but with a calm, cutting precision that turned the tables instantly. What was meant to be India's weakness became its strength. This wasn't a defensive reply. This was offense masquerading as composure. Every line, every gesture carried the weight of a nation that knows its worth. And that's what rattled so many watching. They expected the old routine: nod politely, smile, swallow the insult, move on. Instead, what they got was a reminder that the world isn't stuck in 1990 anymore. The dynamic has shifted, and India isn't waiting for anyone's permission to stand tall on the global stage. The beauty of this response lies in its restraint. There was no shouting, no chest beating, no circus, just facts delivered with the kind of authority that can't be faked. And when the facts are that strong, the bluster on the other side suddenly looks small, petty, even desperate. That's why this moment stung so hard for those who thought they still had the upper hand. The game had changed and they hadn't noticed. What's truly stunning, though, is how this moment echoed beyond the room. Leaders, analysts, ordinary people across continents saw something different. They saw confidence, not compliance. They saw India as a nation that doesn't just defend itself, it defines itself. And when that happens, the ripple effect is enormous. Allies recalibrate, rivals rethink, and the audience, both domestic and international, feels a surge of pride. That's not just diplomacy, that's a power statement. And the lesson is brutally clear: try to corner a rising giant, and you might find yourself the one in the corner, exposed, outmaneuvered, and left wondering when the balance of power shifted right under your nose. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. The response didn't come from a place of anger or insecurity, it came from unshakable confidence. Every word landed like a well-aimed dart, precise and devastating. This wasn't about posturing, it wasn't about trying to look strong, it was about showing, with absolute clarity, that India refuses to be lectured or dictated to. There's something profoundly unsettling for those used to dominance when their target refuses to play the game. The calm rebuttal sliced through the bluster, exposing it for what it was: noise without substance. The impact was immediate. In a single exchange, the old hierarchy cracked. For decades, the expectation was simple. India would absorb pressure, take the hit, and carry on quietly. Not anymore. What unfolded was a masterclass in diplomatic steel. There was no hesitation, no faltering, just a direct, dignified assertion of sovereignty. And the silence that followed said it all. The room, the cameras, the world. They realized that India had just drawn a line that couldn't be crossed. The genius of the reply wasn't in its volume, but in its poise. It showed that true strength doesn't need theatrics. It doesn't need to roar to be heard. The power lies in delivering truth so cleanly that it leaves the opponent with no counter. And that's precisely what happened. An attempt to corner became a platform for India to project maturity and confidence. And that's why it stung so deeply. Because the message was bigger than the man it was directed at. It was aimed at anyone who still believed India could be pushed around. But what really makes this moment historic is the way it resonated far beyond the walls of that stage. It wasn't just Indians who felt it, the entire world saw it. For allies, it was a reassurance that India is a partner, not a pawn. For rivals, it was a warning loud and clear that India cannot be boxed in or bullied. And for the people back home, it was a surge of pride, a validation of their country's standing in the world. That's the kind of response that doesn't just answer a challenge. It rewrites the rules. It shifts the balance from defense to dominance, from caution to confidence. And in doing so, it leaves no doubt the days of India being cornered are well and truly over. Then came a voice that didn't need the weight of political office to make its mark, a voice that represented something even bigger, the power of influence beyond borders. When he spoke, it wasn't about fiery rhetoric or grandstanding. It was about credibility earned over years of global impact. He didn't have to raise his tone. He didn't have to strike back with aggression. His very presence, his words, were proof that India's strength extends far beyond government halls. This was a reminder that the Indian story is not just about diplomacy. It's about innovation, leadership, and intellect commanding respect in every corner of the globe. What rattled those who tried to corner India wasn't just the political pushback. It was the realization that Indians aren't only answering on the world stage through ministers and officials, but through leaders at the helm of the most powerful companies shaping the future. Here was someone whose reach is arguably greater than any politician's. Someone who didn't need to shout because his record spoke for itself. And in that calm, measured tone came a powerful reinforcement of the same message: India isn't small, India isn't silent, and India isn't afraid. The brilliance here was subtle. It wasn't confrontation, it was elevation. Instead of playing defense, the response shifted the focus entirely towards India's undeniable global contribution. The narrative turned from one of pressure and power games to one of innovation, resilience, and success that simply can't be ignored. And that, ironically, was more devastating than any angry retort could ever be, because it showed that India doesn't just survive in the global order. It thrives, it leads, and it defines the very platforms through which the world communicates and works today. The reaction was telling. Those watching from afar realized that India's influence is no longer restricted to politics or geography. It spans boardrooms, markets, and technology that touches billions of lives daily. That kind of influence can't be cornered, can't be bullied, and certainly can't be dismissed. And it struck at the core of the attempted humiliation. How do you corner a nation whose people are already shaping the future of your own industries and societies? This was the quiet knockout punch, graceful, intelligent, undeniable. It wasn't just about one man's words, it was about the symbol he represented. And in that moment, the balance of respect tilted even further. The message was unmistakable. India's voice doesn't just echo in politics, it reverberates in the very foundations of global progress. What became crystal clear in that moment is that the balance of power isn't what it used to be. For so long, the global stage has been tilted in one direction, dominated by the same players, using the same tactics, assuming the same results. But now the shift is undeniable. You could feel it in the tension of that room. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a collision of eras. One represented the old guard, loud and accustomed to obedience. The other embodied a rising force, measured, composed, and unwilling to play second fiddle. That contrast told the whole story. The days when a single Western leader could dictate terms and expect silence in return are finished. What shook the audience wasn't just the rebuttal, but the sheer confidence behind it. There was no attempt to soften the blow, no desperate need to appease. Instead, there was a quiet certainty that India's place at the table is no longer negotiable. That kind of posture terrifies those who built their dominance on the assumption of compliance. Because once a nation like India decides it will no longer bow, the entire world order starts to look different. That's what played out before our eyes. A realignment, live and unfiltered. And the brilliance of it was that it wasn't wrapped in aggression. There were no theatrics, no slogans, no raised fists. Just clarity. Clarity that India is no longer content with being an observer in global affairs. It is a central figure shaping discussions, challenging old structures, and demanding equality of respect. That subtle but unmissable shift rattled more cages than any fiery speech could, because it forced everyone watching to ask the uncomfortable question: who really holds the leverage now? You could sense the ripple effect immediately. Allies began to see the value of partnership, not patronage. Rivals suddenly had to consider the cost of underestimation. And those who tried to corner India were left staring at a reality they weren't prepared for: that the world is changing faster than they are. It's not just about economics, it's not just about military strength, it's about narrative, influence, and presence. And in that moment, India owned all three. The truth is simple: the balance has shifted. It's not a theory, it's not a prediction, it's happening now. And the more the old order tries to push back, the clearer it becomes that the age of unquestioned dominance is over. And in the end, the message that rang loudest was one the world can no longer ignore. Respect is not optional. For too long, the global order has operated on an outdated assumption that certain nations can dictate terms while others politely fall in line. That illusion shattered in an instant. The response delivered wasn't just about defending a position, it was about redefining one. It wasn't "please hear us out," it was "this is who we are and this is where we stand." That difference matters. It turns negotiation into assertion, partnership into equality. What struck hardest wasn't a single line or a clever comeback. It was the broader truth being spelled out for everyone to see. India is not looking for validation. It doesn't need someone else to hand it a certificate of relevance. Its rise is self-evident, its influence undeniable, and its confidence unshakable. That's why the attempt to corner fell so flat, because you cannot box in a nation that no longer seeks anyone's permission to lead. You cannot diminish a voice that now carries across every continent. And here's the part that really unsettled those watching from positions of power. The message wasn't just for one man or one country. It was for the entire world. It said, in effect, that the old hierarchies are collapsing and a new reality has arrived. A reality where India is not the junior partner, not the obedient ally, not the convenient prop. It is an equal, a power in its own right, a voice that carries the weight of 1 billion citizens and a global diaspora shaping the future across industries, technologies, and ideas. That's why the world reacted with such intensity. Some with admiration, some with unease, but all with the recognition that something fundamental had shifted. You could see it in the headlines, hear it in the debates, feel it in the conversations across capitals. Respect wasn't requested, it was commanded, and that is a seismic change in how international politics operates. The ultimate takeaway: this wasn't about a single exchange or even a single leader. It was about a nation planting its flag firmly on the world stage and declaring, without hesitation, we will not be cornered, we will not be diminished, and we will not play the supporting role in someone else's script. The era of India waiting in the wings is over. The era of India leading from the front has begun. So let's be brutally honest, what we witnessed wasn't just a diplomatic exchange, it was a turning point. A moment where the old order tried to flex its muscles and found them flabby, while a rising power stood unshaken, calm, and utterly resolute. This was more than a reply. It was a statement carved into history. India will not be cornered, it will not be patronized, and it certainly will not play second fiddle. The world had better get used to it, because the era of India waiting for its seat at the table is over. From now on, the table isn't complete without India at the head of it.